Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the last lecture of our fall series. I am Charlotte Brow, the director of the Foundation's Arts and Humanities program, and I wanted to take this opportunity to thank a few people, being near the end of our series. Adrian, Emily, and Wendy, the Foundation folks who do all the behind-the-scenes work making these programs possible. And another shout out to Stephen Smith and Andrew Stoop, along with Ken Jones, who take care of all the technical aspects of our program and make it so smooth, run everything so smoothly. We also want to thank some people behind the scenes. Sometimes you get to see them as they greet you on the way in, and that is our wonderful Arts and Humanities Committee members who help by volunteering for events and also bringing ideas for different lectures and programs, and hopefully some trips in the future. If you will, those of you who are members of that committee, if you'll just stand. I know we have Leslie Wheel and Joanne McClave here, and other members who may not have been able to come tonight are Kay Cook, Margaret Bedour, Mary Mills Borden, Jean Whitfield, Scotty Bryan, Dean Tuck, Jane Walston, Rhonda Gaylor, Paul Sailors, Jules Sauls, and Tommy Jarrett, as he's making his entrance right now. And we got something to look forward to because Tommy Jarrett's going to be one of our speakers this spring. But I just wanted to thank everyone for all the support and help they've given us over this fall series. I did want to tell you, if you just want one more chance to attend a lecture, the library, the Wayne County Public Library, is giving a program actually this Thursday night in Walnut 101 at 6 p.m. And this is a very appropriate one for this time. It'll be Dr. Catherine Mellon Charon. She's Associate Professor of History at North Carolina State University, and the title of her program is A Sacred and Enduring Struggle, Voting in the U.S. South. And again, that's in Walnut 101 and at 6 p.m. But tonight, we're going to end our program and our series with a bang, or maybe I should say an artillery volley, right? To be more exact, and that's going to be with a discussion of the Battle of Waterloo. And why I'm standing with the loser, I do not know. But Dr. Doc Heidicker, is bringing us the second of his Great Battles in History series. He has brought us other series in the past, such as the 150th anniversary of the Civil War and the 75th anniversary of World War II. Doc served as the historian of the 4th Fighter Wing at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base for almost 15 years. As with all retirees, you never really retire, do you? And Doc stays busy as a frequent lecturer and briefer at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, and with his wife, Judine, they operate her business, Classic Aviation and War Art. Let's give Doc a warm welcome.
Thanks for coming, everybody. I love giving lectures for the Foundation because the technical support is so extraordinary. That's the good news. The bad news is, when I'm putting my PowerPoint together, I'm working on a computer screen that's about this big, so some of the visuals will be a little bit fuzzy, because when they're blown up this big, I didn't realize that that's how they were going to be. But I love military history. I love strategy, tactics, weapons, everything. But ultimately, it's about the people. And this battle has some absolutely extraordinary people. And what I'm trying to do this evening is not just give you strategy and tactics, who won and why. But who was doing the battle? Who was leading the forces? And what were they experiencing? What was going on? So a little bit more into the people, because ultimately that's what it's all about. One of the most famous paintings that comes out of the Napoleonic era, the charge of the Scots Greys. Napoleonic Wars. Great uniforms, lots of beautiful horses, the whole shebang. If you saw this battle before the first shot was fired, it would be one of the most beautiful scenes you would ever see. Maybe not so much when it was all over. Napoleonic Wars. During the French Revolution, a very talented young man emerged, started off as an artillery officer, and he would become the Emperor of France and lead his armies to victory throughout Europe. Now, how far did these wars extend? Well, if it wasn't for the Napoleonic Wars, we wouldn't have had our War of 1812 with England. And there's an interesting connection. Major General Sir Edward Pakenham was the commander of the British troops in the Battle of New Orleans, and he was killed in that battle, and he was the brother-in-law of the Duke of Wellington, who you're going to learn a lot more about tonight. Millions of soldiers died during the Napoleonic Wars, and of course Napoleon was simultaneously the master and the terror of Europe. Rock, paper, scissors. Does anybody here not know what rock, paper, scissors are? You know, rock, paper, I guess scissors, and you know, you put it out and your opponent puts it out. Well, I wanted to talk about that because the Napoleonic War, infantry, artillery, and cavalry were rock, paper, scissors. How you use them and in what combination you use them against your opponents, rock, paper, and scissors, determine success or failure. So Napoleonic Wars, rock, paper, scissors is on steroids because there's so many combinations of what can you do. And that's a big part of this battle. One of the items, and little fuzzy, French artillery. There he is, the beast, the master of Europe. April 11th, 1814, Napoleon abdicates. This is the end, or at least at that time. Well, what brought him to that? 1812, he loses over 400,000 soldiers in the Russian campaign. 1814, the armies of Austria, Russia, and Prussia are in the heart of France, and Napoleon is forced to abdicate. He's forced to give up power. He is sent to Elba, and there the former master of Europe is increasingly bored and restless. And he keeps hearing that the French are unhappy with their new king, so he sees an opportunity. Thus, the 100 Days, Napoleon returns to France. March 20th, 1815, Napoleon returns to Paris from his exile in Elba. Now, the Allies are still meeting at the Congress of Vienna to sort of figure out what's Europe going to look like after Napoleon. Well, they not only declare Napoleon an outlaw, they declare war on him personally, not France. They declare war on Napoleon. So 25 March 1815, Austria, Prussia, Russia, and the United Kingdom each pledge 150,000 soldiers to defeat and end Napoleon's new rule. Napoleon Bonaparte. When we're talking about the greatest military commanders of all time, Napoleon has to be towards the very top of that list. When you study his battles and his command of the forces and his ability, strategy, tactics, leadership, absolutely unsurpassed. His soldiers were willing to die for him because of his charisma and his leadership. Wellington himself said Napoleon on a battlefield was worth 40,000 soldiers. Now, early in his career, Napoleon was the master of warfare, using strategy and maneuver to win battles. Well, in 1815, Napoleon is 46. He's sick, he's heavy, he's in poor health, he's much less active than he had been before, and instead of using maneuver to beat his opponents, he uses brute force to batter his opponents into submission. The immediate threat to Napoleon is the Anglo-Allied army under Blucher's command. They're located southwest of Brussels, headquartered at Brussels, and the Prussian army under Marshal Blucher's command. They're located southeast of Brussels, headquartered at Namur. They are right there in the vicinity, ready to take Napoleon on. Now, what's following them? All of this. The German Corps and the North German Federal Army, the Austrian Army of the Upper Rhine, the Swiss Army, the Austrian Army of Upper Italy, the Austrian Army of Naples. These are armies on the march coming to France. These are armies that are organizing, being put together, so they will be on their way as soon as possible. 2 Russian armies, a reserve Prussian army, an Anglo-Sicilian army, 2 Spanish armies, the Netherlands Corps, the Danish contingent, the Portuguese contingent. In other words, all of Europe. Napoleon's back, let's go get him. There he is, the Duke of Wellington. Wellington had worked his way up in the British Army with successful campaigns in India. But while he's fighting battles in India, the rest of Europe is fighting Napoleon. So Napoleon derisively calls Wellington a sepoy general because he was fighting in India. Well, Wellington comes to Portugal and Spain to fight the French, and he beats them again and again and again, including Marshal, to the extent that he not only drives the French out of Portugal and Spain, but he drives into France in 1814. So Wellington and Napoleon have never gone head-to-head, but Wellington is considered, next to Napoleon, the greatest commander. He is also 46, but he is at his prime at the Battle of Waterloo. Again, a really fuzzy photo here, or painting. Wellington's artillery. At Waterloo, Wellington had 157 cannon to Napoleon's 246. Most of Napoleon's guns were bigger. The British guns are used in defense and never in counter-battery fire. In other words, when everything is placed, it would be tempting for the British gunners to shoot at the French artillery. The trouble is, when they did that, they'd be answered by 10 rounds coming back their way. So if you were a battery commander and you fired on the French artillery just to do it, not in defense, Wellington would relieve you of command. Before the battle began, a British artillery commander could see Napoleon reviewing his troops. And he went up to Wellington and said, "Sir, Napoleon's within range. Can I fire on him?" And Wellington says, "Certainly not. Commanders of armies have something better to do than to fire on each other." This is the Earl of Uxbridge, Wellington's second in command. Wellington wasn't happy about that because the Earl of Uxbridge had basically run away with Wellington's sister-in-law. Huge scandal. So when he's appointed Wellington's next in command, he's not happy. Before the battle, Uxbridge says to Wellington, "You know, sir, you could get hurt, you could get killed. What are your plans?" And Wellington looks at him and says, "My plans, sir, are to beat the French." Marshal Gebhard von Blucher, head of the Prussians. He's 72 years old, known as Marshal Forward for his aggressive approach to war. He is captured by the French in 1806 and not treated well and not happy about it. So he hates Napoleon with a just out of bounds completely. And he not only wants to defeat him, he wants to execute him. He's known for his honor and loyalty. These traits will be essential keys to victory at Waterloo. This is his next in command. Now, can anybody pronounce this guy's name? Gneisenau. Like the G isn't even there. This is General August Count von Gneisenau. He is Blucher's next in command, doesn't like the British, doesn't trust Wellington, but he is faithful to Blucher. And the combination of the two of them, again, key to victory. Marshal Michel Ney. Ney, known as the bravest of the brave, in 1815, after Napoleon abdicates, he's in charge of the king's forces. He tells the king when he hears Napoleon has landed, "I'll bring him back in a cage, Your Majesty." Only when he gets to Napoleon with his army, they meet up with Napoleon and his smaller army, everybody's buddies, and Ney abdicates to Napoleon's side. This will be key in the future. Ney is known for his intense and impetuous behavior, but then sometimes he's overly cautious, lethargic, and inactive. You never know which Ney you're going to get. Other than Napoleon himself, Ney is primarily responsible for what happens at Waterloo. Marshal Emmanuel de Grouchy, he was a cavalry commander. When Napoleon comes back, he is appointed a marshal. The Minister of War says, "Don't do that. This guy shouldn't be a marshal." He has never commanded anything other than cavalry. So rock, paper, scissors, all of a sudden he's in charge of cavalry, infantry, and artillery. Napoleon's opening move, when he knows the Prussians and the British Allied Army are here, is to put his army between them so he can beat both of them in detail so they can't combine to beat him. And he successfully places his army between them. So round one goes to Napoleon. Now, just to kind of give you an idea, this is Quatre Bras. That's where the British fight Marshal Ney. This is Ligny. That's where the Prussians fight Napoleon. This is Waterloo up here. And this is Wavre. Berlin is that way. The coast for the British is that way. So I'll tell you what happens at these preliminary battles. Quatre Bras, Ney commands the British against the French, and initially, Wellington commands the British Allied Army. Ney commands the French. Initially, he's opposed by only a brigade, but Ney hesitates, again, remembering how Wellington has beat him in the past. By the time Ney attacks, Wellington arrives in force. So the resulting battle is a draw. Ney heads towards Waterloo. He has seen the ground there previously, and as he says, kept it in his pocket, knowing that he would want to use it in the future. At Ligny, Napoleon commands the forces here, and the Prussians are beaten pretty good. Heavy loss of life. During the battle, Blucher, leading a cavalry charge, his horse is killed. He's trapped under his horse. One of his aides takes a cloak and throws it over him because the French cavalry are in the area, and if they see this guy with all the medals and rank and the whole bit, they'll capture or kill him. So Blucher is saved. Gneisenau withdraws the defeated Prussians and heads towards Wavre, not towards Berlin, because Blucher has promised the British that they will come to each other's aid. Now, during these two battles at Quatre Bras and Ligny, d'Erlon has a corps. Initially, he's assigned to assist Ney at Quatre Bras. When Ney orders it into battle, it's not there because Napoleon has sent a courier and d'Erlon is heading towards Ligny. When he gets to Ligny, he's in the wrong place. So when Napoleon orders it into battle, they're not where it's supposed to be, but by then, Ney has ordered it back to Quatre Bras. So an entire corps of Napoleon's takes part in neither battle. If they had been at Quatre Bras, they would have helped Ney beat the British pretty good. If they were at Ligny, they would have beaten the Prussians even worse than they were beaten. Waterloo may never have taken place, except that corps spent the day going back and forth, being out of the fight completely. This is the Prussians retreating from Ligny. Now, Marshal Grouchy is assigned to pursue Blucher with 33,000 men, 1/3 of Napoleon's army, and prevent the Prussians from linking up with the British Allied army. And again, not the right guy for the job. Now, before Waterloo, Napoleon had 77,500 soldiers. This is without Grouchy, 246 cannon. Most of his army were highly trained and dedicated to serving him. Wellington had fewer soldiers, 73,200, far fewer cannon. His British troops and his King's German Legion, these were German soldiers who fought for the King of England and had fought for Wellington before. They were his best troops, but a large part of his army were Belgium. And they weren't good troops because they'd recently been fighting for Napoleon. So he interspersed them among his good troops. Blucher's got about 100,000 men and 240 cannon, and he's trying to get to Waterloo to link up with Wellington. So the morning of Waterloo, Wellington consolidates his army. Like I said, he had seen this ground before and determined it to be good defensive ground. At 0300, 3 a.m., a messenger confirms that Blucher's army is heading to Waterloo as quickly as possible. So Wellington prepares his army for battle and hopes that the Prussians get there in time. Now, Hougoumont and La Haye Sainte, people have written entire books about these, and I'm just going to briefly mention them so you know what they are. These two places were farms and homes that were on the battlefield between Wellington's lines and Napoleon's lines. And we're talking large stone walls and big stone barns. These were converted into fortresses. Wellington had his troops occupy them, and it was brilliant because it would break up the French attacks. Plus, more than anything else, Wellington has to make the time go by until the Prussians get there. So Hougoumont, 9,000 soldiers at one time were assaulting Hougoumont, which was held by 1,200 British soldiers, and they never took it. But all of this is taking up time. This is the British defending the gates of Hougoumont. French breakfast at Waterloo. Napoleon's generals tell him this is the morning of the battle, that Wellington's troops are impregnable in defensive positions because of their firepower, and they request that Grouchy's forces rejoin Napoleon's army. They had fought Wellington. Napoleon had not. Instead of listening to them, Napoleon says, "You think because Wellington defeated you that he must be a great general. I tell you he is a bad general, that the English are poor troops, and that this affair will be no more serious than eating one's breakfast." The rain delay. The rain the evening before the battle was horrific, the worst rain that people had seen. Just getting to Waterloo was a task. The mud, horrible roads, the whole shebang. The morning of the battle, the ground has basically turned to mud. Now, Napoleon had said, strategy is the art of making use of time and space. I am less concerned about the latter than the former. Space we can recover, lost time never. The head of Napoleon's artillery says, sire, we can't start the battle for 4 hours. We have to let the ground dry. Now, Napoleon knows that Blucher's army is heading towards Wellington, but he allows this, and he can never get back those 4 hours. Wanted to show you this. This is the whole battle, but I wanted to point a couple of things out. First of all, this is Wellington's allied army, so troops from the Netherlands, Hanover, Great Britain, Nassau, Brussels, and like I said, the King's German legions, so a mixed army. Blucher's army, Prussian, Prussian, Prussian. Napoleon's army, French, French, French. So we'll come back to this when the Prussians start arriving, but this just kind of shows you what we're dealing with. Now, Wellington has his troops on the opposite crest of the ridge. What that means is, if this is the ridge and the French are that way, Napoleon's troops are on the opposite, so that when the French are firing artillery, they're on the other side of the hill. So Wellington's primary aim is to protect the lives of his soldiers and use them as efficiently as possible, while Napoleon's strategy is to batter the other armies head on, no matter how many men he loses in the process. So at 11:25, the first French assault takes place. Now, D'Erlon, his corps is intact because he didn't fight at Quatre Bras or Ligny, so he begins to assault Wellington's lines with 18,000 men in column. Now, these columns are gigantic. It might be 200 men across and 17 men deep. Now, try to picture that. The British lines, as we'll see, are 4 deep. But when the lines are 4 deep, all 4 can be firing. When you've got a column that's 17 lines deep, no, just the guys in the front. So why do the French do that? Because it has consistently made the opposing armies run. Because these columns are coming up, they've got cavalry on the side, they've just had a big artillery bombardment, the bands are playing, the flags are waving. So if you're a British soldier and you see this coming at you, that's pretty scary stuff. Wellington's troops are on the reverse slope, actually ordered to lie down to protect them from the artillery. Like I said, their lines are 4 men deep. Now, they wait until the French troops are 40 yards away, 120 feet. That's nothing. So all of a sudden, they spring up out of the ground and start firing very accurate, coordinated fire into the French columns. So the French columns are thrown into disarray. Well, Wellington didn't have much cavalry in Portugal and Spain. He's got it now. And he's got these guys that I showed you at the very beginning, the Scots Greys, big horses, big men. They haven't been fighting in Europe for 20 years the way the rest of the countries have. So this is the best cavalry in the world. They slam into the flank of D'Erlon's columns. So they're already in disarray. They do a number on them. They break them up completely. one of Wellington's primary commanders, Picton. Picton is wounded at Quatre Bras, doesn't tell anybody. So he's leading his division against D'Erlon's assault, and he's killed outright leading them. But his leadership and courage helps throw back the French. Now, after the initial French assault is thrown back, and the cavalry, after they break up the columns, they keep going, and they wind up getting into the French artillery, but by this point, they're tired, they're knee-deep in mud. Napoleon throws his cavalry against them, severe losses. They should have stopped and come back, but they didn't. But there's a lull after this battle, and the British lines are stabilizing, and the cavalry is coming back. The wounded and the dead are being taken care of. The thousands of French prisoners are being taken to the rear of the British line. Marshal Ney sees this, and what does he think? He thinks, the British are retreating. We've beaten them. So he immediately grabs the nearest cavalry and says, let's go, charge. And the cavalry commander's like, no, I don't think so. What are we doing? And Ney pulls rank, and he's like, we're going. And what happens is the adjacent French cavalry, they all join in. So you got 10,000 French cavalry heading to the British lines. Well, rock, paper, scissors. What's particularly effective against cavalry? Artillery, because they're big targets. So the British artillery is making mincemeat of the French cavalry. Well, when the French cavalry, and they look good too, little fuzzy, but they look good. Now, when they crest the hill, they don't see the British in disarray. They see the British have formed squares. What that means is they literally have formed rectangles, 4 soldiers deep. And I'll have the visual for you. The 2 front ranks are kneeling with their butt of the rifle against the ground and the bayonets pointing outward. And the 2 behind them are shooting. Horses will not charge a formation like that. They won't. You can't make them. So they see the British are in squares. Now, the artillery, the crews, at the last minute, they're firing canister, which is like giant shotguns, and then they race into the squares. Now, the French cavalry should have had spikes and hammers to disable the British artillery. They didn't. When Ney sees these gigantic British squares spread all over the field, he should have said, oops, mistake on my part, we're out of here. But they didn't. They circled, they tried to break the squares, suffered tremendously. Finally, they retreated, and when they retreated, the artillery crews, the British artillery crews, ran back to the cannons and gave it to the cavalry again as they retreated. Again, sorry it's so fuzzy, but you can get an idea of what the square would look like. This is a little bit better. You can see how that would function. So you got your cavalry, they can't charge into the square. The horses won't go. So rock, paper, scissors, square versus cavalry, square wins. Now we're getting into the late afternoon. So the Prussians are arriving. Despite the miserable roads and some French resistance, not enough, Blucher has kept his promise and brought his army to Waterloo. Grouchy did not ever intercept Blucher's army. His troops literally can hear the sound of the Battle of Waterloo. And his next in command says Marshal Grouchy, that's where the battle's being fought. Let's go straight to the battle. And Grouchy goes, nope, my orders are to follow the Prussians. Not going to do it. So at 4 p.m., the Prussian advance forces begin to engage Napoleon's army at Waterloo. At 6:45, they literally join the British line. So the British, who've been fighting all day, now have reinforcements from the Prussians. So this is the British line, the British Allied line. Some of the Prussians help form part of the line, and the rest of the Prussians are down here attacking the flank of the French. So you've got British here, Prussians here, Prussians here. Just what Napoleon has feared the most. Now this is the crisis moment because the French are still strong and the British have been fighting all day. This is Ensign Edward Macready of the 30th Foot. The Duke visited us frequently at this momentous period. He was coolness personified. As he crossed the rear face of our square, a shell fell amongst our grenadiers and he checked his horse to see its effect. Some men were blown to pieces by the explosion and he merely stirred the reins of his charger. No leader ever possessed so fully the confidence of his soldiery, but none did love him. Whenever he appeared, a murmur of silence, stand to your front, here's the Duke, was heard, and then all was steady as on a parade. His aides de camp, Colonels Canning and Gordon, fell near our square, and the former died within it. Wellington's coolness had a tremendous impact on his army, and he spent the day all over the battlefield. Wherever it was at its worst, Wellington was there. His men might not love him, but they trusted him. He gave them the confidence to stay in place when they see these massive French columns coming towards them. Again, sorry for the fuzziness, but this is the old guard. 7 p.m., Napoleon knows the Prussians are there. He knows the British lines have been taking a beating all day. So Marshal Ney leads the French Old Guards. These are the veteran troops. These are the special troops of Napoleon. Their appearance on the battlefield for years has always led to French victory. Napoleon will throw them in at the last minute to crush his enemies. Now, as they advance, again, in column, Wellington positions his lines of men on the reverse slope, just like he did previously. When the Old Guard is right up to the British position, Wellington orders his soldiers up, and they deliver volley after volley, point blank, into the Old Guard columns. Now, if you're in the front rank, you can fire back. But if you're further back, all you know is chaos. You know it's not going well, so it's even possible that the people who begin to break aren't the front rank, it's the people behind them, because nothing's worse than knowing things are going bad and you don't know what bad is. So they begin to retreat down the hill, showing the Old Guard in battle. British Allied Prussian victory. Wellington sees the Old Guard breaking and orders his entire line to advance against the Old Guard, who are now caught between the advancing British and the arriving Prussians. Remember Uxbridge? Wellington and Uxbridge are riding beside each other. One of the final French artillery rounds misses Wellington, but hits Uxbridge in the leg. Uxbridge looks down at his leg and says to Napoleon, by God, sir, I've lost my leg. And Napoleon looks over at Uxbridge's leg and says, by God, sir, so you have. French army disintegrates. The Allied victory is complete. Wellington and Blucher meet on the battlefield, and the Prussians, they've been marching all day, but they haven't been fighting all day. agree to pursue the French army. Wellington and Blucher meeting on the battlefield. Casualties, severe. Wellington, 17,000 men, 3,500 killed, over 10,000 wounded. A lot of them deserted, but again, these were the Dutch Belgians, especially the ones who spoke French and who had literally previously fought for Napoleon. The Prussians lose over 31,000, not just on this day, but the campaign. Estimated Napoleon lost over 30,000. The day of Waterloo, a week after the battle, the French rolls listed over 46,000 soldiers missing. So his army disintegrates, showing the old guard fighting to the last. After the battle, Wellington couldn't sleep in his own bed because another of his aides was dying in it. He was awakened early by Dr. Hume with a list of casualties. Dr. Hume said he was much affected. I felt the tears dropping fast upon my hand. He brushed them away and said to me, well, thank God. I don't know what it is to lose a battle, but certainly nothing can be more painful than to gain one with the loss of so many of one's friends. For all of his coolness and aloofness, Wellington truly felt the loss of his men. So why did Napoleon lose? The great Napoleon, why did he lose at Waterloo? After Ligny, Napoleon wasted resources sending Grouchy after Blucher. Grouchy was not capable of finding and finishing him off. The wrong man for the job. Rock, paper, scissors, should have seen that one coming. Napoleon wasted 4 hours to attack Wellington at Waterloo, waiting for the ground to dry. Now, would have been difficult to fight in the mud? Yes, but Napoleon knew Blucher was on his way. Napoleon did not listen to his general's advice about Wellington's tactics and British firepower. He should have tried to maneuver. He should have tried to roll up the British flank. But attacking them head on when the British are on the reverse slope, that's exactly what Wellington wanted him to do. Wellington knew Marshal Ney, and he basically turned the battle over to him. And Napoleon was stationary during the battle. He wasn't all over. He picked his spot and, for the most part, stayed there. So he couldn't react to events as they unfolded. Now, what were Ney's errors? He didn't attack at Quatre Bras for 3 hours. After Quatre Bras, he did not vigorously pursue Wellington's army, allowing Wellington to get to Waterloo and consolidate his forces. Despite fighting Wellington in Portugal, Ney still did not know how to deal with Wellington's tactics. The cavalry assault was totally on Ney. He ordered it without infantry support, didn't bring spikes, and when he saw the British were in square, he should have said, well, we gave it the old college try, but this ain't working. Let's go back to our lines. Didn't do that. Why did Wellington win? He lost the initiative at Ligny and Quatre Bras, but he didn't worry about that. He quickly regained it. After Quatre Bras, he quickly got his army to Waterloo, again, despite the horrific storms. His reverse slope tactics conserved the lives of his troops while devastating the enemy. He communicated with and he trusted Blucher. He was all over the battlefield. The number of people, Uxbridge and his aides, who died literally standing or riding next to Wellington was all day long. It was almost miraculous that Wellington himself wasn't killed. But he was all over the field and he reacted to every crisis to turn a near defeat into total victory. How did Blucher contribute? Well, despite being wounded at Ligny, Blucher and Gneisenau withdrew their defeated army and headed north, not east, so they could join up with Wellington. Despite horrific roads and weather, Blucher joined Wellington at Waterloo and turned the tide of battle in defeating Napoleon. After the battle, vigorously pursued Napoleon's defeated army. And I hate to say it, but the Prussians, there was such hatred between the Prussians and the French, not a whole lot of prisoners taken. The end of Napoleon. Napoleon escaped the Waterloo battlefield and arrives in Paris on 21 June. Tries to rally support, build another army, but people are done. He wants to escape to America, but the British have blockaded France, so he surrenders aboard HMS Bellerophon. He's exiled for the final time to St. Helena, a lot further away than Elba, and dies in 1821, so 6 years later. The end of Marshal Ney. Remember, Marshal Ney, he worked for the king, and he switched sides. Well, because of that, he committed treason. So people recommended, you know, you better get out of Dodge. Like Grouchy fled to America, told Ney, you might consider doing the same. Ney wouldn't. So December 7th, 1815, he was executed by a French firing squad. He refused to blindfold, refused to kneel, and died in his marshal's uniform. The bravest of the brave was no more. This is his execution. And not everybody was pleased to be shooting this great hero of France. Sorry for the fuzziness. This is Blucher, and this is Napoleon's hat. So somehow he's gotten his hands on it, and I'm sure he's enjoying having Napoleon's hat. Blucher, after the battle, Blucher and Gneisenau wanted to execute Napoleon. And they told Napoleon, we need to kill this guy. And Napoleon and Wellington, they told Wellington, we need to kill this guy. And Wellington came back and said, you know, we've already decided we're going to exile him. We're not going to kill him. But if you really want to murder him, you go right ahead. And when he put in that language, Blucher and Gneisenau knew, I guess we can't kill this guy. Blucher wanted to blow up a bridge in Paris, which was dedicated to the French defeating the Prussians at Jena. Wellington heard about this. So he put a British sentry on the bridge. And the Prussians, very polite, went up to the sentry. Pardon me, could you please leave the bridge? We need to blow it up. And the sentry said, sorry, my orders are to basically, I'm posted to the bridge, so I can't leave. So they didn't blow up the bridge. Blucher dies in 1819. Wellington, after Waterloo, spent the rest of his life as the man who beat Napoleon, made him the most successful British general of all time at that time. Showered with awards and estates, and briefly served as prime minister, lived a long life, lived to the age of 83, dying in 1852. What was the impact of Waterloo on history? Well, with the forces arrayed against him, Napoleon may have been defeated even if he won the Battle of Waterloo. Even if he beat the British and the Prussians, you've got all these other armies coming to France. But European coalitions against Napoleon had always been fragile things, and Europe was tired of years of war. Without Waterloo, Napoleon very well may have remained in power. So Waterloo finally removed Napoleon from the stage of world history. Fini, kaput, the end. That's all, folks. No more Napoleon. Questions?
If you have a question, if you'll raise your hand and I'll come to you. Oh, coming.
She's coming. I love this stuff, especially learning about the people and their idiosyncrasies. I just love it.
Thank you, Roy, for sharing this with us. I have a question, let's say prior to the battle. As I understand it, Napoleon had pretty much conquered Europe, has he not? I mean, the French were so powerful.
Prior to Waterloo,
I mean, his success, didn't he have many battles?
he had conquered Europe, but when he abdicates in 1814, all the armies of Europe are in Paris. So he's done. So for Waterloo, he manages to put together a pretty good French army, but the rest of Europe is heading his way.
Yeah, I mean, he came back from exile and within a very short period of time formed this army, which was pretty remarkable within itself.
Absolutely.
So these people were they mad with the king? I mean, what was going on?
People were not happy with the king, and let's face it, the greatest era in the history of France was the Napoleonic era, because that's when France was the master of Europe, conquering everybody, beating larger armies. So back in the day when glory and Marshal victory was significant and important, France was it. So when he came back, young men who may not have fought under him, wow, now's my chance to fight for Napoleon. And his veterans were all too happy to go to war with him again.
Any more questions? Nope. Hold on, Dave. Hold on.
She's going to bring you the
I got to
mic.
bring you the mic because we're on, we're streaming.
How did military commanders of this day instill in tens of thousands of troops the discipline to stand up in a slaughterhouse environment and give just as good as they got without turning and running?
Great question. I think when you look at this battle, the French soldiers did it because of their unbelievable dedication to Napoleon. Vive l'Empereur, they would yell as they advanced against the British. So their motivation was fighting for the greatest Frenchman who ever lived. The British, on the other hand, they didn't have that feeling for Wellington, but they knew, based on his tactics, he cared about their lives, and he was victorious. He had beaten the French again and again and again in Portugal and Spain. So I think the motivation for the French was more of a visceral, emotional motivation, whereas for the British soldiers, I think it was more intellectual. This is our guy. He knows how to fight battles, and if we just stick with him and follow the orders of our superiors, we're not only going to win, but hopefully we're going to survive. So I think the motivation was different, but I think that's what it was. And I think, throughout history, soldiers are motivated by performing well and being heroic in front of their fellow soldiers. And I think when you have this kind of an army, that was especially true. Anybody else?
It seems like that throughout history there's always been someone who is wanting to conquer and to expand their power. Do you feel like they will ever get to the point where someone doesn't feel like they need to expand their power and to take over other people's countries? And
will we ever get there?
Pardon me? Will
we ever get there?
Yeah, what do you think?
Wow. What if they gave a war and nobody came? What scares me is, I think we live in a world in which other nations of the world feel a desire for conquest, and their young men are basically raised and trained that that is a good thing. Now, we have the most powerful military in the world. I had the privilege to serve with our airmen at Seymour Johnson, and I had the privilege to serve in the Marine Corps. But if we got into a shooting war with Red China and we had to draft young Americans, how do you think that would go? Not well. So I think America might be heading towards not conquering other people is a good thing. We want to live our lives and be helpful and contribute to civilization. But if you have other countries whose mindset is, you know, we want to own the Pacific and chase America out of here and maybe gobble up their resources, could be tough. So I think different societies view war and conquest differently. We're not evolving at the same pace. And because of that, that could lead to bad consequences.
I'm coming.
Was Wellington's tactic for having his soldiers lie down behind the ridge taking cover, I mean, before that point, a lot of the battles were column to column. Was that really a change in the way battles were done from then on?
Oh, yeah.
What was the influence of that?
It was looked down upon by the French. Like, oh my gosh, what a cowardly thing to do. It reminds me, the Civil War started more like a Napoleonic war, where our troops would stand in line and fire 75 yards away and just tear great holes in each army. But by 1865, whenever troops stopped, like, okay, we're going to be in this position for the night, they started building fortifications and trenches. So Wellington's tactic was the right tactic, and that's the way warfare was heading. It's not just about let's all show up in these gigantic columns in these magnificent uniforms and we'll make the enemy run away, but in the meantime we're going to suffer horrific casualties. So I think Wellington was ahead of his time, but there was a sense, especially with the French, like, you know, cowards lying down, and they don't stand up and fight us the way they're supposed to.
One of your slides said something about the spikes and the artillery guns. I had a hard time picturing that. That's not, the artillery gun would be like a cannon, is that right? And they'd have to get close enough to insert a spike into it?
They would ram.
Okay. It
They
looks as
would
though they'd
ram
be shot.
the cannonball into the cannon.
But wouldn't they be shot before they could get that close?
I'm not understanding. Oh, yeah, what they would have done where the fuse is, they would have taken spikes. They would have to bring them with them, taken the spike and hammered it into that part of the cannon. That would have disabled the cannon so you couldn't use it anymore.
I see.
Yes.
I see. In The Patriot, that film, which is about what I know about battle from that film, it does seem that some of the Indians' tactics were used that might have seemed cowardly too, like ambushes and
Oh, yeah.
disguise.
Exactly.
Even in the Revolutionary War, those tactics might have.
Big reason why we beat the British. And I mean, think about this too. You know, I talked about the fact that Wellington's own brother-in-law died at the Battle of New Orleans. Well, how was that battle fought? The British marched straight into the American lines, and what were the Americans doing? Were we all standing in line waiting to get shot down by the British? No. We had created cotton bales and wagons and whatever we could stand behind So we're undercover, and the British are out in the open, and it was one of the most one-sided battles. Careful, I'll have my wife sing the song for you. But it was one of the most one-sided battles in the history of warfare, because the British came on with no cover, while our folks just shot the dickens out of them. Now, if you enjoyed the lecture and if you want to enjoy something else, the film Waterloo, 1970, Rod Steiger as Napoleon and Christopher Plummer as Wellington, there's a couple of problems here and there, but overall, very historically accurate and very well done. And they use tens of thousands of soldiers. No CG. This is before computers, so if you ever want to see a really good film, I highly recommend it.
Thank you so much, Doc, and thank you all for coming.
Thanks, everybody.